Paying the reparations for slavery is a topic of heated controversy. The idea has been portrayed as so nebulous that few people today think reparations for slavery will ever materialize. But suppose we claim that this is a hotly debated subject in Washington, D.C., and among the senior brass. Abolition of slavery must be accomplished immediately due to the fact that the United States government has engaged in a wide range of financing activities, including wars, peace, and countless more that remain unnamed. As a matter of morality, the United States can no longer avoid it. Additionally, the original estimated amount for repairs was $350,000. The new per-person cap is $151 million. The issue is, with 14% of the population being Black Americans, who will foot the bill? Also, will all African Americans receive the reparation funds? You will never think about reparations for slavery the same way after watching this video. Many Americans who are descended from slaves encounter baseless opposition when they seek reparations. There are many who contend that reparations are unnecessary because they were not personally affected by slavery. What about people whose white supremacist ancestors left them vast fortunes and vast tracts of land, though? Step into the rich tapestry of Black history with us here at the Chronicles of Blacks. How come the descendants of white supremacists continue to reap the benefits of the wealth that slave owners accumulated if Black Americans have no claim to reparations for the wrongs done to them? The arguments against reparations are shown to be flawed by this. A number of state agencies and economists had previously proposed paying $360,000 to every African American, but it was obvious to all that this was insufficient. The United States hoped to end the generations-long obligation by paying a small amount. Currently, the sum is $151 million. This sum is enough for many, but who will foot the bill for the reparations when they eventually reach the trillions? Since no government has access to such a substantial sum, knowing this is crucial for determining its feasibility. Many different ideas have surfaced. One idea is to use the money and property that white supremacists' descendants have today. The main point is that white slave owners' fortunes, which were built on the backs of African Americans who were enslaved, did not magically disappear when slavery was outlawed. Rather, it has been handed down from one generation to the next, benefiting future generations financially. As a direct outcome of this wrongdoing, white and Black Americans now enjoy drastically different levels of prosperity, educational attainment, and career opportunities. Those who were enslaved and their descendants endured tremendous pain and trauma as a result of the deeply immoral institution of slavery that persisted for centuries in the United States. We must take action to rectify this injustice. The original proposal was for the federal government to foot the bill for repairs. It was contended that the role of the federal government in legitimizing slavery through constitutional protections and federal law was substantial. The creation of a special fund for repairs is, thus, of paramount importance. White supremacist slave owners' descendants should also not own the wealth that came from slavery if it is claimed that descendants of slaves shouldn't get reparations since they didn't experience the brutalities firsthand. This fortune would have to be taken if this happened. Who should be the rightful owner of this wealth? Slaves' descendants, who are still dealing with systemic racism, rightfully own this wealth, both legally and ethically. From the time of slavery onward, Black Americans have been bearing the brunt of racism's economic consequences, with losses estimated at a mind-boggling $70 trillion. The historical wealth disparity is intricately related to this high cost. In 2016, middle-class white families in the U.S. had an average wealth of $49,703, while Black families had an average wealth of only $13,024, equal to just 8.6% of white families' wealth. According to the Black Tax, The Cost of Being Black in America, author Sean Rochester, this wealth disparity is a result of slavery's long-lasting effects. Rochester breaks down the $70 trillion in economic losses sustained by Black Americans over many generations as a direct result of racism and discrimination. The large racial wealth gap that exists today is mostly attributable to this discrimination. Slavery, which lasted for 250 years, was the root cause of the wealth disparity. Estimates put the value of the labor of Black slaves extracted between 1619 and 1865 at anywhere from $24 trillion to $97 trillion, though it is difficult to put a precise number on it. The average amount that Rochester uses in his calculations is $50 trillion. Even though they worked hard to build the country, Black Americans still only own around 2% of the wealth in the United States. Black Americans have historically been denied access to government-run initiatives aimed at enhancing their financial standing. As an example, they were not allowed to participate in the 1863 Homestead Act, which allowed citizens to receive 160 acres of land for a small fee and 5 years of cultivating the land. For 70 years, a group of mostly white homesteaders staked claims to 270 million acres, which are now worth $1.6 trillion. Also, Black Americans lost $143 billion because the Social Security Act of 1935 did not include them, and another $45 billion because the GI Bill of 1944 did not provide benefits to Black veterans. If you enjoy our videos and would like to see more like this one, please consider subscribing to our channel and clicking the like button. We are seeking your support as we strive to establish a robust community. Okay then. There was still violent resistance and destruction of progress whenever Black Americans tried to build their wealth networks and companies. As a tragic example, consider the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre, in which a white mob set fire to Black-owned businesses in Tulsa, Oklahoma's affluent Greenwood district. The continued wealth disparity was exacerbated by these upheavals and the demotion of Black people to low-paying occupations. Rochester factors and losses sustained during the Jim Crow and civil rights periods to arrive at the $70 trillion estimate. This highlights the fact that Black Americans endured economic and racial segregation throughout this time, limiting their involvement in the American economy. Greetings, valued viewers. Our analytics have revealed that our audience spans the globe. We would greatly appreciate it if you could kindly share your location with us in the comments section. At present, there is a noticeable disparity in racial wealth. On average, white families have around 10 times as much wealth as Black families. In instance, compared to Black college grads, white grads have 7 times as much wealth. The United States must make amends to the Black American community for its historical wrongs if it wants the American dream to be a reality for all people. Individual monetary payments aimed at reducing the racial wealth gap should constitute reparations. In addition to resolving inequalities in housing, education, and company ownership, these reparations should include programs that help people build wealth. The combined investments in factories and railroads exceeded the estimated value of enslaved Black Americans' labor in 1860, which was over $3 billion. Enslaved people's cotton output in 1861 was worth $250 million. While the nation's economy benefited from the massive wealth that slave ownership created, the enslaved people had very little chance of becoming wealthy. The federal government has failed to compensate the descendants of enslaved Black Americans for the equity they lost due to anti-Black policies in housing, transportation, and businesses, and the descendants of slaves have not received compensation for their labor either. Black Americans have been unfairly denied opportunities to accumulate wealth due to historical injustices like slavery, Jim Crow segregation, and discriminatory practices like redlining. The racial wealth gap cannot be solved by merely promoting personal effort and behavioral change. This is proven by the fact that Black college graduates have more wealth than white high school dropouts. Sometimes people think reparations aren't going to work. Nonetheless, the United States reparations history shows that the practice is not new to the country. As restitution for the forced removal from their ancestral lands, Native Americans have been granted land and substantial financial compensation for a variety of programs and benefits. The United States government contributed to reparations for Holocaust survivors, including substantial investments over time through the Marshall Plan, and Japanese Americans received $1.5 billion for their World War II internment. In 1952, West Germany agreed to pay 3.45 billion Deutsche Marks to Holocaust survivors. On the other hand, no group has yet received compensation for state-sanctioned racial discrimination except Black Americans. The United States had multiple chances to address the legacy of slavery and fulfill the promise of the American dream, but it consistently passed them up, even though slavery helped some white families accumulate immense wealth. The policy of 40 acres and a mule was first suggested but later scrapped. An important chance for America to make amends for slavery presented itself soon after the Civil War ended. General William Sherman and other prominent Union figures pushed for the land grant of 40 acres to every Black family. Black families were given 400,000 acres of seized Confederate land and, in addition to mules, by General Sherman in Field Order 15. After President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, however, President Andrew Johnson reversed Field Order 15, allowing the land to be returned to the original owners of the slaves. Abolitionists were given more power by the federal government than Black Americans were given in terms of resources to help them survive. Former slave owners were even compensated in some cases for the property they had lost due to enslavement. With few other options for employment, many African Americans went back to their roots as sharecroppers, essentially toiling for their former masters. As America struggled to recover from the Great Depression and stock market crash of 1929, the New Deal came into being later that decade. An estimated $50 billion, or around $50 trillion, in today's dollars was spent by President Franklin D. Roosevelt on the New Deal's programs and initiatives. Social Security and the GI Bill, two cornerstones of the New Deal, did not do enough to remedy racial injustices. Because of redlining and racial housing covenants, Black World War II veterans did not have equal access to post-war benefits as white veterans owing to the GI Bill's local implementation. Domestic and agricultural workers were both left out of Social Security, despite the fact that their jobs could have greatly contributed to greater equality in the United States. As a result of this discrimination, 60% of black workers in the country and 75% in the South were marginalized in these occupations. Black veterans and workers were disproportionately impacted by these provisions, which were inserted into the legislation to benefit the white majority during the Great Depression. Although other oppressed groups have received reparations, Black Americans have been systematically ignored by the federal government. The United States must pass a thorough federal reparations plan for African Americans if it is serious about reducing the wealth disparity between races and protecting the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The United States government has been trying to avoid paying reparations since it simply does not have the resources to do so. But now that a workable solution is available, the delay in paying reparations can be explained solely by malice. The main objective must be to plunder the estates and riches of people who were enslaved in the past. Now more than ever before is the time to trace this out. It is possible to identify the heirs of former slave owners by tracking down their wealth and property. In order to establish a fund for repairs, taxes can subsequently be levied on them. Indeed, it is possible and practical to make repairs. Nevertheless, it is deserving of more attention. Racist attitudes are on display in the fact that the majority of white Americans do not back reparations. As an immoral yardstick, denying the notion of relinquishing riches and property acquired from former masters serves as a test. Instead of paying reparations, they would rather keep the wealth that was acquired through exploitation. It makes one wonder how African Americans will fare in a nation that recognizes no one but white people as citizens. Republic. Cori Bush, Democrat, California, introduced a bill in May 2023 to compensate African Americans for the harms done by slavery and the Jim Crow period. The bill called for $14 trillion in reparations. This latest proposal, which is part of a larger Democratic effort to compensate Black Americans for generations of injustice, is called the Reparations Now bill. In contrast to the 16% of Republicans who hold this opinion, 58% of Democrats do, in fact, support reparations, according to a Reuters poll. The poll also found that while 26% of white Americans are in favor of reparations, 74% of Black Americans are. Presenting its final report to the California legislature, the task force to study and develop reparation proposals for African Americans was in California. This in-depth study looked at how slavery affected African Americans and how that hurt has spread throughout American culture. Outlining more than 115 suggestions for redressing the injustices suffered, the report proposes a thorough reparations plan. Although the report supported financial compensation for affected individuals, it did not set a specific amount, so lawmakers are free to decide. Do you have any opinions? Will reparations for slavery be paid now, or is that still a vague concept? What if the United States government declared reparations for slavery? Are you in favor of it? Post your opinions and thoughts in the space provided below. Do you want us to continue making videos? If so, please show your support by clicking the bell icon and subscribing to the Chronicles of Blacks. Additionally, our channel has more videos for you to watch. After receiving 10% of the vote in the previous election, Black Americans voted overwhelmingly for Donald Trump in the 2024 American election. At least 20% of African American voters went for Donald Trump this time. Considering that Black voters have consistently shown loyalty to the Democratic Party, this is absolutely astounding. Should we therefore interpret this as a private promise made by Donald Trump to Black businessmen and leaders? Are we talking about reparations for slavery here? Given that African Americans did not have faith in Kamala Harris on this occasion, it raises the possibility that something transpired behind closed doors. See what the president-elect has to say about reparations for slavery, his campaign promises, and his plans in this video. Alright, let's begin. After decades of back and forth, the reparations debate over slavery finally found a turning point when California spearheaded efforts to determine the most effective means of redressing the damage that centuries of racial discrimination had done. Researching these effects and coming up with workable solutions is the job of the state's reparations task force. A daring proposal was put out by the task force to give eligible African Americans up to $350,000 in direct cash payments by 2023. The question of whether or not all states should launch such studies and adopt concrete measures to execute comparable proposals arose following this proposal. Alternatively, we could just make this proposal available to all states. The two candidates' reparations promises and their actual ability to implement them became the clear dividing line in this election. A thorough investigation into monetary reparations is required prior to any action, according to Kamala Harris. She changed the subject away from direct payments and toward her larger economic agenda, which seeks to empower Black communities through programs that increase their wealth. That is to say, rather than offering direct payments, Kamala Harris supports systemic changes that can provide Black people equal opportunities. She made it very obvious that reparations are a complex issue that requires further investigation. It has to be studied, Harris said in reference to reparations. There is absolutely no doubt regarding that. Asterisk. Her cautious approach shows that she is cognizant of the delicate political nature of the matter. Harris recognized the topic's importance without committing to a specific plan by requesting additional study. She was able to keep prospective swing voters on her side by being cautious, which was especially useful in politically divisive areas. According to Harris, her economic platform speaks to the hopes and dreams of Black Americans, especially when it comes to achieving financial autonomy. She explained, "My agenda is about tapping into the ambitions and the aspirations, knowing that folks want to have an opportunity if they want to build wealth, including intergenerational wealth." As opposed to direct monetary reparations, Harris believes that this emphasis on entrepreneurship, homeownership, and access to capital is a more long-term solution to the racial wealth disparity. With his victory in the election under his belt, the discussion can shift to his platform. The majority of Black Americans were caught off guard by Trump's triumph, but he is now president nonetheless. His views on reparations for slavery will surely have an effect on the lives of about 500,000 Black Americans. This is your text with all of the punctuation and formatting. 8. Reparations for slavery weren't a major talking point during Donald Trump's 2016 campaign. Since the majority of voters weren't paying attention to the issue back then, Trump seldom brought it up in his speeches. Nevertheless, Trump promptly expressed doubt and dismissed reparations when asked about them. In an apparent attempt to downplay the idea's potential for unity, he cast doubt on whether reparations were a reasonable or just means of redressing past wrongs. If you enjoy our videos and would like to see more like this one, please consider subscribing to our channel and clicking the like button. With your help, we can create a strong community. Okay, let's go on. Democratic candidates such as Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, and Bernie Sanders had already begun to propose various forms of compensation for the descendants of Africans who had been enslaved by the time Trump was halfway through his first term in office. During an interview with The Hill in June 2019, Trump was asked about his stance, and he gave a direct response. To which he responded, "I don't see it happening. Reparations," he said, "would only serve to widen existing racial gaps and foster animosity among Americans instead of bringing them together." It was crystal clear to Trump that the Democrats were trying to use reparations as a political gimmick to win over Black voters, not because they wanted to make amends for past wrongs. He felt that pursuing this matter would further inflame tensions between various racial groups. The call for reparations came back with a vengeance later in 2020, after the Black Lives Matter protests and the killing of George Floyd. But Trump's opposition remained unwavering. Instead of responding to demands for reparations and other forms of racial justice, his administration took a firm law and order position, emphasizing support for law enforcement. A consistent theme in Trump's arguments was his belief that reparations unjustly punished those who had no connection to slavery. He saw reparations as a means to unfairly redistribute wealth. As an alternative to compensatory payments, he advocated economic policies such as tax cuts and job creation, claiming that these would have a greater positive impact on the Black community. President Trump's opposition to reparations persisted even after he stepped down from office. At his speeches and in the media, he presented himself as a radical critic of woke culture, citing reparations as an illustration of the left's ill-advised policies. He saw reparations as just another tool in the cultural arsenal. Nevertheless, Trump started to change his tone. His sudden shift in strategy included reaching out to white voters and disillusioned Asian Americans. His attacks on affirmative action, which he said unfairly favored other minority groups over Asian Americans, were illustrative of this. Trump sought to broaden his base by addressing issues that progressive policies had ignored or unfairly treated by changing the way the conversation was framed. Trump shocked many by proposing what he claimed was a new reparations plan just before the 2024 presidential election. However, paying restitution to slaves' descendants was not the point here. At a campaign rally in November 2024, Trump, on the other hand, revealed a program that would combat what he called racial bias in schools. As part of this revised plan, federal civil rights lawsuits would be filed against educational institutions that were alleged to have used racist admissions practices. Also included were heavy fines for schools found to have engaged in such practices and the use of those funds to compensate students who had experienced discrimination, particularly those of Asian American descent. Trump framed his proposal as an effort to combat prejudice in the modern era, establishing himself as an advocate for admissions based on merit. Critics and civil rights organizations, however, wasted no time casting this as an attempt to reframe reparations in a manner that would ostentatiously exclude African Americans. They said that Trump's proposal made an effort to appease groups with more current grievances, like Asian Americans, while ignoring the historical background of slavery. Trump seemed to be shifting his focus away from compensating Black Americans for centuries of systematic oppression and toward addressing what he sees as white Americans' reverse discrimination. Individuals who had anticipated substantial transformation are understandably perplexed and let down by this change. I will propose a bill to have them fined up to the full amount of their endowment, Trump warned. Victims of these unlawful and unfair policies will receive compensation from a portion of the confiscated funds. Many Black voters were hoping that Trump would consider compensating the descendants of enslaved Africans, so their outrage was understandable when they heard this statement and thought it was about reparations for white Americans. Diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI initiatives and critical race theory have long been targets of Trump's ire, and his proposal seems to be in line with these views. His claims that these kinds of programs divide society and keep white people in their place have persisted for a long time. Dismantling DEI programs is an explicit goal of his Project 2025 plan, which lays out a possible agenda for the second term. He argues that these programs unfairly hurt white Americans. As soon as Trump spoke, many Black commentators saw the ramifications. Reparations for white people were announced by Trump, according to prominent political analyst Keith Boykin. He claimed he would sue the Justice Department to fine universities that prioritize diversity, equity, and inclusion so that he, personally, could compensate white people for the harm he feels they've suffered at the hands of racists. Because of this change in emphasis, Black voters who had hoped that Trump would back actual reparations for slaves' descendants are now feeling disappointed. Hotly debated topics include the sincerity of Trump's promises to Black Americans and his apparent fixation on white supremacist practices rather than on past wrongs. It is unclear if Trump, in his bid for a second term in office, will prioritize the complaints of his base or move his focus to address the historical injustices endured by Black Americans. Many Black communities are hoping that Trump will prioritize reparations, but given his record, it seems highly unlikely. Are you in agreement? Is Black America's support for Donald Trump based on genuine disappointment with the Democratic Party, or does he intend to actually pay reparations to slaves, or is it all just rhetoric? Post your predictions for Donald Trump's policies toward African Americans in the space provided below. Is he going to improve things or make them worse? Do you want us to continue making videos? If so, you can help us out by clicking the bell icon and subscribing to the Chronicles of Blacks. On our channel, you'll find even more videos.